town's Mayberry. You know, I called it Mayberry 1,000,001 times because it is. It's just a bunch of friendly people.
It's a great place to raise your kids.
There are a lot of very close-knit families that either grandparents raise their children and their children raise their children.
I mean, I lived here 58 years, so for me it's a great thing, you know, that the village has gone forward.
Everybody can come in to a community or a town, you know, a village, and you can just live there. But there's something about Worth that when at this village, you just don't live here, you give your heart to it.
Worth, to me, was the greatest place ever.
In the beginning of the 1900s in Worth, you had the growth of the canal, you had people coming because you had the construction of the railroad, you had a lot of people that were looking for land at that time. The land was very fertile. You had growth in the commerce that was coming through the railroad and also through the waterways. But also around that time period there was a racetrack. So it really brought a lot of people in from the city. It would bring people around. It was truly a destination. In 1914, they actually started building the CalSag. Our incorporation was on August 29th, and at that time, all the able-bodied males in the town were able to vote. So at that time, incorporation was so important because as your population grows, you need things like streets and sidewalks, and you need a little bit more order. Worth got its name from a general, actually, who was in the Spanish-American War. He worked his way up his rank through the military. And actually, William Jenkins Worth is his name, and he never actually set foot in Worth. The main family were the Crandall family, and they actually came from New York. Around the 1850s, actually, they were the first permanent settlers, and what made them so unique to the area is they were the first to subdivide, where actually the railroads came to them to actually purchase properties so that they could lay their tracks through their property as well, which was very important for expansion. They were the first family to donate property to the schools as well, actually where our current Worth Elementary School is. You also had the Bishop family. They had the first general store in this area. The Lucas family were also big, along with the Wilsons. They were also another big family. All came here because of the construction of the canal as well.
I'm 89 years old. I'll turn 90 in March. And I was born here and lived here all my life. My father was the village blacksmith. And that bell that's in the yard, if the telephone call, Dad was in the blacksmith shop, Ma ring the bell. And if it was dinner time, she'd ring the bell.
Well, I was born on 111th and Southwest Highway. Then we moved up on 111th. My father, he worked on the canal. That's where he hurt his leg. Then they made a store for him down there. And like ice cream and candy, and then they had a couple tables in there, and people come there and play cards. We were a little bit east, a few houses east of Bishop's store.
Worth Elementary is not the first elementary school that was here. The original one was at 111th in Harlem, where our Veterans Memorial stands now, and it was just a small, typical one-room schoolhouse. They decided that because of the population expansion at that time, the Worth Elementary was built in 1914 and opened in 1915, which the original part of the building still stands today.
Went to Worth Elementary there. And when I graduated, there was 12 of us graduated. There was at that time 65 kids in the school. There was 2 rooms. on outside toilets. The girls was on the east side of the building and the boys on the west side. And my mother was the first president of the PTA in 127. My father was also mayor from 1930 to 1941. Just a small little town. There was a couple hundred people here until the war started, and then after the war is when it really started to build up after the Second World War.
It was a slow, gradual process of people coming in here, moving in from the city, but there was such a boom in the 1940s and 50s. You literally went from a town with 300-400 people almost to 6,000 by 1949, 1950. Because after World War II, the government was offering land grants to veterans. You could purchase property at a cheaper rate if you were a veteran. When you look back on it, you can really see the dedication that this town has to this country. We have a lot of our foundations are built on people that have served this country in one form or another. The American Legion is the perfect example of this.
Of course, the Legion was named for Mr. Mars, who passed away in World War I. He was the only man from Worth that passed away in World War I. My dad was killed in World War II. He was the only Worthonian that passed away in World War II. So when they formed the Legion, they named it after the two of them. And about a year after the Legion received their charter, then the Auxiliary received their charter. I was 4 months old when he went into the Army. I was 16 months old when he was killed.
I'll be seeing you in every lovely summer's day.
Many of those community organizations had their beginnings in the 40s and the 50s. The Lions Club is celebrating their 65th anniversary, I believe, this year. But they were the very first group that actually put up our street signs. The fire department was a volunteer fire department ever since the beginning. It was formally established in 1925, again by about 4 residents. The Conway family was very instrumental in that, the Plum family.
For a while, before the village hall was built here, the fire calls went into Myers' Tavern. And, well, that's when the firehouse was next door there. And then when the village built this, and where the police station is now, that was the firehouse. There was 2 stalls.
Every able-bodied man, when they heard that bell going off behind the firehouse, they would all rush to order. It was not fully established until like the late 60s when they actually started getting salaries, which is truly amazing.
I grew up on 11250 Worth Avenue. I grew up in the baby boomers, so there were plenty of children around to play with. My pals and stuff, we could have a baseball game. Worth Woods Parks, where they are presently right now. That was actually one of the places that the village kids could go and play. They could ice skate in the wintertime. They could also play ball through the summer times.
My parents built their home in 1954. I was born in 55, so came home from the hospital to Worth. Still live in Worth. In fact, I live right next door to the house I grew up in. Worth was just a wonderful place to grow up. There was not a lot of houses built yet, so we would be so excited when somebody would build a new house because we knew they're getting refrigerators and stoves, and there's all these big cardboard boxes. We had huge ditches then because we had sewers. We didn't have city water, of course, and we'd take the cardboard boxes and slide down them. We'd be busy for 3 days with those.
The older kids used to make, and because we had a lot of prairie here in Worth, they would make underground tunnels and have underground forts, and you literally had to crawl on your hands and knees.
Every family had a different sign. Mrs. Walker had the bell when it was time for dinner. One had a whistle. My mom would just go out and yell, "Where are you kids at?" You know, so it was a great place. You'd run in, eat, clean up the kitchen, and you're back out till dark.
Another thing that was a lot of fun was connecting our hoses. And we'd go all the way to Oak Park Avenue, and anybody that came down the street on their bike, they'd get wet.
107th in Harlem there, this guy had goats. And when we were first moved in, the goats would always be in our yard. And he would have to come and get them and bring them back to his place on 107th in Harlem there. And we also had a donkey that lived a block away from me.
We had big classes because we were the war babies, and my first grade teacher was Miss Lucas, who was later the superintendent, and it was her first year teaching that she taught me first grade.
– 111th Street had a really different feeling than it does now. This was before your malls, before your shopping centers. People would come from all around. They would go to Cheryl's Shoe Shop. They would go to the Chat and Chew prior to that. They would go to the Cleaners. I know that Jewel at the time.
We had Slacky's, a grocery store, and the Pick and Save was next to it. That's where the bank is. And we had another little store right where the Peak Alpine is. That used to be a little Certified.
When I moved in, Harlem Ave and 111th was 2 lanes. Down on the corner there was a gas station, the railroad track ran across Harlem Ave, and whenever they had a freight train back then, it just backed everything up.
The oldest business in town is Schroeder's Material, actually. They're located on Southwest Highway. I know that just from talking with Mr. Schroeder, they have family that were here at the time when Stony Creek was much bigger than what it is now. Actually, their property is located right along this historic waterway. Another older business in town is Schmedeke Funeral Home. Worth Snack Shop, which is now also known as Worth Restaurant. Before that it was Loretta's. It was just the place to be.
I can remember being 4 and sitting in there and waiting for a sandwich, you know. And he didn't have the white bread, so we had to run across the street to the Certified grocery store to get the bread so I could have a chicken sandwich on toast.
Worth used to be a really center, it used to be a center of commerce and economic opportunity.
We moved here in 1950. I was involved later that year about the sanitary sewer system that was debatable, controversial, because all of us had septic tanks. And, you know, they last so long that you have to keep cleaning them out, and then they back up. The only way to have a successful community is by having a sanitary sewer system.
The Fickus family first arrived in 1963 when my mom and dad got married, and they found a nice little ranch home just for the new married couple. So they raised all 3 of us children. You know, we were very active right on the onset, and then she started a preschool within our home. So right from that start, everybody in the village knew Miss Jean, and my dad was the principal, Mr. Bob.
We went through another population expansion again in the 1960s. It really continued to grow, with Worth Woods opening up in '65, and then also Worth Ridge, and even Worth Terrace Center. The Park District has a very interesting story. It really started off with a small group of volunteers, literally out of Helen Goy's house. I mean, she would run programs out of her front room. She talks about how her main phone number in her house was used as the main place just for recreation purposes.
I enjoyed being a Park District Commissioner. I met some people that had a lot of history in Worth, and so I was like able to find out things that had happened 20 years ago. I had probably one of the best teachers would have been Helen Goy. She worked as the secretary at the park at the time, and so she was just a fountain of information.
My sister and I participating in ballet and all the Worth Park District programs that we had, the dance lessons, the activities that would be at Gale Moore Park. You always remember the Worth Park District was definitely a part of growing up.
The first library, similar to the Park District, was in the basement of a residence home, the Goodline family, and they are allegedly the first free library that ever existed in the state of Illinois. And all of their books were donated by the Boy Scouts, the Cub Scouts, the Worth Police. They would have book drives, and again, they just outgrew their space, and the village saw the need and renovated their basement and opened their doors, and you see the community constantly pulling together to really make things work. The library then eventually moved to 111th Street.
Mrs. Jones, Mrs. Lukasek, they were all a part of our kids' lives. And then there was Mrs. Fickus, who was at the library. She would do library hour for kids, and the kids loved her. They enjoyed going to the park and to the library to see these people that really were underpaid, worked hard, did a lot of volunteer work for our community. So you could see it was a good place to raise a family.
We were big giant families in the Worth house, that ranch. My mom had a Pinochle Club, which was Lorraine Roberts and Emma Jane Bialik and Mrs. Meone and my mom, and between them they had 30 kids. We would do the Worth pool. That was a summertime thing. We'd go there with 75 cents, and if you're lucky, $1. And then if you were lucky, you'd have 10 or 15 cents left over. And you'd hit Ben Franklin to get the penny candy. We hung out in what the golf course is now. And we called it the Prairie because when we were young, it was a prairie.
It was a wonderful time to grow up in like the 1960s and 70s here in Worth. We had t-shirts that said Worth, 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 Worth all the way down. So we would say as a young, and I know other communities do it too, but we would say, we're from Worth and we couldn't be prouder. If you can hear us, we'll shout a little louder. And then it would get louder and louder and louder. So all of us kids would do that at like pep assemblies at the junior high, you know, rooting on our Rams and such.
Well, I came here when the junior high opened up in 1969. Matter of fact, when I was interviewed for the job, the school was not done yet. I taught 125 kids for 35 years. I'd be hard-pressed to find another school that had the camaraderie of teachers, the educational level. We had a lot of people who had master's degrees at this level. You know, we had science fairs, you had like cake fairs, you had history fairs, we had plays we put on. Those things always involved the community coming in, and they come out in bunches, you know.
The Clifford Tobey family donated the first land for the United Methodist Church, which still stands today. And they've always been a staple in the community. They host many different community organizations. Currently now they are home to the Boy Scouts, and they host all of their meetings there. St. Mark's Church is also located in Worth, also around 7600 West 111th Street. Another very big supporter in the community. They host our community PADS shelter.
I was on the council, I taught Sunday school, and did all different activities over there. It's a great place to be.
Worth actually has two other smaller Christian churches, and right outside of Worth is Our Lady of the Ridge, a Catholic church. And they've also been very supportive in all of our community events. So the water tower is a huge staple in the community. I think it's fair to say that no matter where you are in this world, if people ask you, oh, where are you from? And you say Worth, they'll say, oh, the Friendly Village, because of that iconic phrase that's on the water tower. The history is actually quite simple. Bill Schneider, who was actually running a campaign for trustee in 1957, decided that he was going to run as an independent. So he went door to door to every place in the village, and he was interviewed by our Worth Record, which was a newspaper that was established here by Aggie Daniels. She interviewed him and said, you know, what is it that you like most about Worth? And he said, From my campaign experience, it is the friendliest village that I've ever been in. It is the friendly village. It didn't go up on the water tower until it was built in the 60s. Worth actually operated on a well system up until then. Worth actually had a lot of insight by going and switching into Lake Michigan water, and not many people realize how important that is. The Committee of 39, I believe, is what they were called, and they went out and they campaigned really hard to try to get the water.
It's set up so you can see it for a long duration when you're going north, and you can see it for a long duration going south.
Baseball goes a long way back through Worth. The Worth Athletic Association was originally called the Boys Club, and Don Hansky, who was, again, a homegrown Worth person, was into baseball as a child. And he actually played semi-pro and then was drafted into the Sox, the White Sox. And unfortunately, his career was cut short because of the war. He was drafted, and he was called into service for World War II. So when he came back, he actually went and petitioned the White Sox to actually get the first equipment for the boys club, for the baseball team. And through the years, you have your boys club, but you also had your mother's club, your women's club that did, most of the fundraising for these events.
I was on the mother's board back then. It was Worth Boys Club Baseball, because we didn't have girls.
I enrolled my son in baseball. At the time, it was called Worth Boys Club, and they decided to not be around the next year. They were going to just leave it to a board. And so I ended up becoming on the board of the Worth Athletic Association.
My son got involved in T-ball, and as it all progressed, started out helping, coaching, eventually becoming onto the board for WAA.
Baseball was big in this town, and it eventually grew and grew where they were able to play on the land behind Worth Woods, and also the village recognized the need, and now they have the field also, the Betty Matera field, over by the boat launch as well. It's almost a natural progression for people when they live here. You can't help but want to get involved and become a public servant, and then it becomes something that is naturally ingrained in your family. Even starting from the very first families, the Woods, the Conways, even up through Dan Kamingo, who's actually our longest mayor. He was mayor for 16 years.
Several of my family members have been village presidents here. One being Mr. Russert, my great uncle, and another my first uncle, Walt Kirkstra.
I was in during the Korean War. I was in active duty for 4 years, and joining the American Legion is a big plus because you mix with veterans.
They do their annual Ton of Food drive, which was started in the 40s. A lot of this community service came out of the American Legion.
If it wasn't for the men and women that have served in the military, who knows where we would be.
The Eternal Flame, or the Veterans Memorial, was dedicated in 1993, and it actually cost them $200,000, all of which was raised mostly by Al Grajek with the help of Dan Kamingo, who was the mayor at the time.
90% of what we did was already sponsored by and thought of by Al Grajek. He was the leader of the whole enterprise. He got the money. He went out and solicited money.
Al himself owned a business in Worth. He was a barber, but he also was a veteran and was also part of the American Legion.
It's a great thing, and I'm proud, very proud of our town that they do it. The other nice thing is the participation by the Park District, the other folks that come in, and the police department, and the Boy Scouts, and the Girl Scouts. And this town has a lot of warmth.
no community is really without its celebration, and Worth Days is obviously the biggest community event that Worth hosts. It's going on its 67th year, and it was originally started by your police, fire, Lions Club, and it started off as a parade.
My brother was one of the first ones that had the parade from the Legion at that time. And then I was parade marshal for 4 or 5 years.
It was very neighborhood. You'd have kids on bikes, you'd have the Girl Scouts, the Boy Scouts, with all of their amazing floats.
Parade would go down 111th Street, and the picnic would be up west of 111th Street.
At that time, they would stop at Deasing's Grove, which was located about 7600 West 111th Street, which was a picnic grove.
Back when I was growing up, Worth, what they did for the parade was every neighborhood got to design either a float or they got to decorate their bikes, and we were called the Normandy Street Irregulars.
Eventually, they ended up forming a committee in the 80s that was the Worth Days Committee, very much centered around the Park District.
And my dad actually became one of the commissioners of the Park District, and then he, along with so many other commissioners, started the Worth Days Committee, in which they did the Worth Days Fest as well as the parades.
Worth Days was being held over on 107th and Oak Park under the Worth Day Committee, which was a committee filled with volunteers that worked very hard to raise funds to have a free event.
And the fest was very small back then. It was in, Peaks Park. So it was very small, and our firefighters would come out and they would have the big barrel, it would be like Chicago Ridge firefighters, versus Worth, and they'd have the barrels in the middle, and they would, have a big contest.
In 2000, they turned it over to the Village of Worth, and then the village took it and turned it into a very large festival, which is held by our boat launch. At that point, it went from a one-day fest up to a 3 or sometimes even 4-day festival. Again, going back and forth on the days and the times, but the most consistent thing has always been the parade. It's one of the largest parades on the south side, and it grows every year.
Almost everybody around town comes into it, and they have floats and people line the streets, and it's just a good time, especially with Worth Days. It's like a big fest where everybody in town, and that's why they call it Worth Days, because everybody in town sits there and they just have fun.
I sit here and I try to think, what is my most favorite moment in history of Worth? And it always comes back to how people give back to the town. It's those small stories of when people are struggling, or even if the village is struggling, the town always finds a way to make it work. And because of that spirit, you find that people want to stay. They want to raise their families here. They want to see their children giving back. It's just a natural progression of living in the town.
One of the great things about this community is the fact that it really hasn't changed in the fact that we all kind of stick together.
Our daughter Emily was diagnosed a little over 2 years ago with leukemia. We were suddenly, overwhelmingly sometimes, aware of just how many people in this village cared. And I will never, ever, ever be able to repay those people for all that they did, and the love and support they showed us.
Well, I can tell you one thing I know for certain, that I've been here a long time and working here at the village. There's a lot of people who still live here a long time.
Oh, it's been here for 100 years, this village. There isn't too many villages can say that. And if you look at some of the residents, they've been here a while here in this town.
I just love it. I love the diversity. I love how everything is so close to us. I love the compassion of the people in Worth. I love the school district. I just love everything in Worth.
It's just a good town. There's good people.
advice would I give? Well, hopefully, just make sure that our sewers are maintained.
It makes a difference when people are involved in their schools, when people are involved in their park districts and their library. Stay involved, get your kids active. You know when you're a part of it because your heart is a part of it. So you become vested, you become bonded to that village and get involved.
And can I say that Worth has changed over the last 100 years? It has, but that community spirit hasn't. It's been there since the beginning, and I hope that it continues on for another 100 years.
Happy birthday, Worth.
Happy birthday, Worth.
Happy 100 birthday, Worth.
Happy 100-year birthday, Worth.
Happy birthday, Worth.
Happy birthday, Worth. Happy 100th.
Happy birthday, Worth.
Happy birthday, Worth, and celebrating our centennial for 100 years, going strong and looking forward to the next 100 years.
Happy birthday!